Okay, so welcome to our study of layer 2, the limbic system, the famous emotional center of the brain. In popular culture, be it songs, movies, or stories from childhood, there's often this sort of dichotomy that's set up between logic or the brain and emotion, which is usually represented as the heart, right? So there's all these pairings. We have Kirk and Spock. Spock is logical, unmotivated by feeling, and Kirk is passionate and chooses feeling above all else. Up above me there's I can't point. There's an image of a heart and a brain arm wrestling. And sometimes that's how we feel when we're making tough decisions, following the heart or following the brain. So I want to kind of give you a neuroscience perspective on what it really means when we talk about following our heart and following our brain. Spoiler alert, it's all the brain. So in this beautiful piece of art, the caption up top says, when people say they listen to their heart, what they really mean is that their limbic system is bossing their frontal lobes around. And, this is kind of important to grasp. So, the heart itself has nothing to say to you besides ba-bump, ba-bump, ba-bump. And we know that, these heart feelings that we sense are actually coming from the center of our brain, from the second region to evolve, the mammalian limbic system. So if we were to compare the brain to a delicious Tootsie Pop, we see in that far image where the Tootsie Pop is cut in half that we have three structures that kind of map well onto the three parts of the brain. So take a second for yourself to guess. If the Tootsie Pop represents a human brain, what does each part represent? So the part of the stem of the Tootsie Pop that's going up into the Tootsie Pop, what brain region is that analogous to? In this sort of gooey center, what brain region is that analogous to? And then this layer that's over the top of everything, what brain region is that analogous to? Do you have three guesses in your head? So hopefully you were on track and guessed that the part of the stem of the Tootsie Pop that goes into the pop is just like our brain stem. Down there at the bottom, right as the spinal cord enters the skull, we would have our medulla controlling heart rate and breathing. And then as you move up the brain stem, you have more complex structures all the way to the thalamus and hypothalamus at the top. And then this sort of gooey middle of the Tootsie Pop is the limbic system, with the cortex as that layer around the top. And this idea of the limbic system as sort of the gooey center of the Tootsie Pop is a great analogy because it's kind of the source of most of the ooey gooey parts of human nature. So, in this art piece, the amygdala, which is represented there as a red almond shaped little brain region, is saying, "You're going to listen to my feelings, dang it." And the frontal cortex, looking dejected, says, "Dude, all right, just stop yelling." You can see the frontal cortex looks worn out already in this cartoon, which you can feel when your heart and brain have been arguing for a while. I'll share just one more meme, which is one of my favorites, about this idea of head versus heart, which we now all know is simply limbic system versus cortex. So this one says, "Not only do my head and heart argue, my vagina likes to give its opinion too." And I thought this was hilarious. I feel you, girl. And I also thought it was a good chance for us to do a little thinking about how we would translate this meme into neuroscience. So I apologize for the dorkiness of this. We all know that one of the most annoying things a person can do when someone creates a piece of art, a joke, a meme, is to come at it with this kind of, well, actually energy, but that's what we're going to do right now. So if we look at this meme, we know that when she says her head, she means her cortex. And when she says her heart, she means her limbic system. So when she says that her vagina likes to give its opinion too, get that in the mix with the cortex and the limbic system, what brain region would be speaking for the vagina in this situation? Do you have a guess based off of what we learned last week? Which region is responsible for regulating sexual drives and desires? Hopefully, you guessed that hypothalamus. That would be the brain region that is getting in the mix when the head, heart, and vagina are all having an argument. Remember that the hypothalamus is this brain region sitting at the top of the diencephalon and managing all of your body's basic needs, including basic sexual drives. We'll learn about another part of the limbic system called the reward network that is also capable of speaking for the vagina or, sort of speaking for your sexual and romantic interests in terms of giving you that drive to talk to the person you're crushing on or, chase someone attractive or whatever it is. Thanks for indulging in a little well actually with me.
It's actually kind of an important way to learn to think as a scientist.
If we were to characterize the limbic system as a whole, I think a good nickname would be the drama center of the brain because it fuels all of our basic drives and it produces those simple but powerful emotions like fear, disgust, anger that explain a lot of human behavior. Let me take you through the three main parts of the limbic system that we'll be studying this week. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about the amygdala. The amygdala is a tiny almond-shaped part of the brain buried deep inside. There's one on each side of your head. They're called the amygdalae, if you want to pluralize, but we'll often speak of the amygdala in the singular since the left and right sides do similar functions. And the amygdala is really, it's often nicknamed the fear center of the brain. And like a lot of nicknames, that's mostly accurate, but leaves some things out. We'll find that it's also highly evolved in anger and that it fuels a certain type of emotional and fear-based learning. Next, we dive into taking a look at the hippocampus. So in the slide up here, you see the hippocampus as this blue structure that is snaking all the way around the limbic system with this long, beautiful tail. And the hippocampus is responsible for processing new long-term memories. And it plays a special role in processing our emotional memories, as we'll learn in lesson 14. And then finally, we'll be taking a look at this reward network, the dopamine-based desire center of your brain that fuels your drive for getting the resources that you need to stay alive, be it food and water or spiritual enlightenment. The reward network is concerned with the most basic, simple physical rewards and the most esoteric, lofty, kind of spiritual or existential rewards. And we'll talk about how that works.
And you can see here why we call the limbic system the drama center. Because when you put all these pieces together, the amygdala producing fear and anger, the reward network producing all of our drive and motivation, we've got nearly everything Shakespeare ever wrote about.
Okay, and so to give you just a little bit better of a sense of where these structures exist within the physical brain, I'm using my brain demo mitten. What you see here on the front is just what you would see on the front of the brain, the frontal cortex. And then we see the other main regions of the cortex wrapping around on the top. So the occipital lobe where visual processing happens is back here, and the frontal lobe responsible for executive function is up here. To get a look at the limbic system, we really have to kind of unwrap the brain and take a look at these center structures that are curving around inside the brain. You saw that sort of curve that the hippocampus made as it snaked around, and that's represented by the way this thumb piece is curving. So here we have the little bitty amygdala and then the hippocampus wrapping up and curving around it. To see the reward network, we really have to kind of look across the brain because rather than being one anatomical structure, this is a set of structures that are all connected by a pathway for one of the most important neurotransmitters in your brain, dopamine. Now, we'll be talking about the reward network again in a lot of detail when we study dopamine. For now, what you should recall is that there are some structures in the midbrain, in the front of the midbrain, where a lot of the dopamine-based neurons in your brain reside. So if we're to look at the brainstem, that's here on the side of my hand. So we've got the medulla at the very bottom. This section is the pons. And then right up here, we have the midbrain. And in purple, you see a little structure called the VTA. Now, that was sort of sitting in the center of the front of the midbrain in the slice we looked at last week.
So, this is the slide that we looked at in our discussion of the midbrain. And in that slice of brain tissue in the upper right hand corner, you can see that on the front of the midbrain, there's a couple special regions that produce dopamine cells. The VTA, in purple in the center, is where the reward network begins in the brainstem.
And you see these purple lines projecting from the VTA up and out through a whole section of the limbic system and up into the cortex. And the reward network is that whole set of structures that are connected by these snaking axons of neurons producing dopamine. Other than its location in the center of the brain, what brings the limbic system together conceptually is the structure of the cortex in this region. So recall that in the brainstem, gray and white matter is not very distinct, and brainstem structures such as the hypothalamus are organized as clusters of nuclei, little bitty mini brain centers, each doing one job. For instance, digestion, regulation, as we talked about in relationship to the hypothalamus. So, out in the limbic system, instead, we have this more ordered structure where the cell bodies sort of are at the surface and axons are coming in below. So, gray and white matter are distinct. And the name for the kind of cortex that is found throughout the limbic system is allocortex. And that just means the first type of cortex to evolve 250 million years ago when the limbic system evolved. And it's a little simpler than the neocortex that is on the outside surface of the brain. The neocortex has more layers and a couple more cool features. We'll talk about that later. But the allocortex is like evolution's original shot at designing a cortex. It's got the same basic structure, but just a little simpler. And all of the limbic structures are composed of allocortex. So, because the limbic system is so crucial to emotion, which of course is one of the big things that we want to explain in a course on human behavior and the way the brain shapes it, I want to give you just a little primer of how emotion works in the brain. And that's coming up in the next video lecture in this lesson.